The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption, a town that had seen better days and worse men. Sarah Mae Bennett stood on the rickety porch of her father's failing general store, watching the heat shimmer off the packed earth like water that would never quench this godforsaken land's thirst. She was 19 years old today, though nobody had remembered to mention it, least of all her father who was inside the store right now, making a deal with the devil himself. That devil went by the name of James "Black Jack" Malone, and he was the most wanted bandit in 3 territories. Sarah had seen his face on wanted posters plastered in every town within 100 miles. $10,000 for his capture, dead or alive. The sketches never did him justice, she thought bitterly. They couldn't capture the way his dark eyes seemed to see straight through a person, or the dangerous grace with which he moved, like a mountain lion sizing up its prey. She could hear their voices drifting through the open window, her father's wheedling tone making her stomach turn. She's a good girl, untouched, knows her place. She can cook, clean, won't give you no trouble. And she's pretty enough, you've seen her yourself. I don't need a wife, Bennett. Black Jack's voice was deep and rough, like whiskey poured over gravel. I need that horse your daughter's been riding. That Palomino mare with the white blaze. Sunshine. Her father's voice cracked with desperation. That horse ain't worth nothing compared to what I'm offering you. My Sarah, she could keep house for you, wherever it is you hole up. A man needs a fast horse more than he needs complications. There was the sound of boots on floorboards, movement. But I'll tell you what, Bennett. I'm feeling generous today. Give me the horse and your daughter both, and I'll clear your debt with the Carson gang. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Carson gang. 3 months ago, her father had borrowed money from them to keep the store afloat, money he had no hope of repaying. The Carsons didn't take kindly to unpaid debts. Last week, they'd sent one of their men around with a message: pay up by month's end, or they'd take payment in blood and ashes. You'd do that? Her father's voice brightened with pathetic hope. You'd square things with the Carsons? I got history with Dutch Carson. He'll listen to me. But only if you throw in the girl. Otherwise, just sell me the horse and handle your own problems. Sarah didn't wait to hear her father's answer. She already knew what it would be. She'd seen it in his eyes these past weeks, the way he looked at her like she was just another piece of inventory he could trade away. Her mother had died bringing her into this world, and sometimes Sarah wondered if her father had ever forgiven her for that. She walked down the steps and kept walking, her worn boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each step. She didn't have a plan, didn't have anywhere to go. The town was dying, same as her father's store, same as everything else in this corner of Texas that God seemed to have forgotten about. Most of the young folks had already left, chasing rumors of gold in California or opportunities back east. Sarah had stayed because she had nowhere else to go and no money to get there. Sarah Mae. She stopped but didn't turn around. Her father's footsteps hurried up behind her, and then he was grabbing her arm, spinning her to face him. His face was flushed, whether from heat or shame she couldn't tell. It's settled, he said, not meeting her eyes. You're going with Mr. Malone. He's going to take care of the Carson situation, and in return you're selling me like a slave. Sarah jerked her arm free. I ain't livestock, Pa. You watch your tone with me, girl. His face darkened. You think you got better options? You think any decent man in this territory is going to marry a shopkeeper's daughter with no dowry? At least this way you'll be useful, and I'll be alive to see another season. So I'm supposed to sacrifice myself for your mistakes? You're supposed to do your duty to your family, same as any daughter. He glanced back toward the store where Black Jack was no doubt waiting. He ain't a bad man, Sarah. Little rough around the edges maybe, but he's giving us a fair deal. He's a bandit and a killer. He's a man who knows how to survive in hard times. That's more than most can say. Her father's voice softened slightly, almost pleading. Please, Sarah Mae. I got no other way out of this. The Carsons, they'll burn everything. They'll kill me. You want that on your conscience. Sarah looked at her father, really looked at him. When had he become so old? So weak. She remembered a time, barely, when he'd seemed strong and capable, when her mother was still alive and the store had been prosperous. But that was another lifetime, another world. This was the world she lived in now, where fathers traded their daughters for horses and survival. "Fine," she said quietly. "But don't you dare pretend this is anything other than what it is. You're selling me to save your own skin. At least have the decency to be honest about it." She brushed past him and walked back toward the store, her head held high even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Black Jack Malone was standing on the porch now, one shoulder leaned against a post, his dark hat pulled low over his eyes. He was tall and lean, dressed all in black except for a dark red bandana around his neck. Two guns sat in holsters on his hips, and Sarah had no doubt he knew how to use them. "Miss Bennet," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mockery or might have been genuine courtesy. "Your father tells me we've reached an understanding." "My father tells a lot of things," Sarah replied, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Most of them lies he tells himself so he can sleep at night." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Black Jack's face. "You got a sharp tongue for a girl in your position." "And what position is that exactly, Mr. Malone? Property? Servant? What exactly did my father promise you?" He studied her for a long moment, those dark eyes unreadable. "He promised me a horse. Your extra cargo I didn't ask for but agreed to take on." "How generous of you." "I thought so." He straightened up and gestured toward two horses tied to the hitching post, a big black stallion that was clearly his, and Sunshine, her beloved Palomino mare with a distinctive white blaze down her face. "We're burning daylight. Get whatever belongings you can't live without. You got 10 minutes. Sarah wanted to argue, to refuse, to do anything but comply with this absurd situation. But what choice did she have? Run. To where? Stay. And watch the Carsons burn her father alive? She swallowed her pride and climbed the steps past Black Jack, catching a scent of leather and gunpowder and something else, something wild and dangerous that made her pulse quicken. Inside the store, her father was already packing up a small canvas bag with her things, a spare dress, her mother's hairbrush, a tintype photograph of her parents on their wedding day. He pressed the bag into her hands without meeting her eyes. "Be good," he mumbled. "Mind your manners. Maybe things will work out better than you think." Sarah took the bag without responding. There was nothing left to say to him. She walked back outside where Black Jack was already mounted on his stallion, holding Sunshine's reins. "You can ride, I assume?" he asked. "Better than you probably," Sarah shot back, taking the reins and swinging up into the saddle with practiced ease. Sunshine whinnied softly, nuzzling her knee, and Sarah stroked her neck. At least she wouldn't be completely alone. Black Jack watched her with something that might have been approval. "Follow me and keep up. We got ground to cover before nightfall." He turned his horse and started down the main street at an easy trot. Sarah followed, refusing to look back at her father or the store or the only life she'd ever known. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than the betrayal she was leaving behind. They rode in silence for hours, leaving redemption far behind and heading into the rough country to the west. The land here was wild and broken, all mesas and canyons and stretches of scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that were almost beautiful if you could forget about the heat and the dust and the complete uncertainty of the future. Finally, as twilight gathered, Black Jack led them into a narrow canyon where a small spring bubbled up from between the rocks. He dismounted and began unsaddling his horse with efficient movements. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "There's water for the horses and decent shelter. I'll get a fire going." Sarah slid down from Sunshine's back, her legs stiff from the long ride. She tended to her mare first, removing the saddle and bridle, letting her drink from the spring. Black Jack was already gathering deadwood for a fire, moving around the campsite with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "I suppose you expect me to cook," Sarah said, watching him strike flint to steel. "Can you?" "Yes." "Then I'd appreciate it if you would. Trail rations in my saddlebag. Nothing fancy, just beans and hardtack." Sarah found the food and a battered pot, filled it with water from the spring, and set it over the fire once the flames were strong enough. They worked in silence, two strangers thrown together by circumstance and desperation. The beans bubbled and softened, and Sarah stirred in some salt and a bit of dried meat to give them flavor. They ate sitting on opposite sides of the fire, the darkness pressing in around them filled with the sounds of the desert night. Coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the occasional hoot of an owl. "Why'd you agree to take me?" Sarah asked finally, breaking the silence. "You said yourself you didn't need the complication." Black Jack set down his tin plate and looked at her across the flames. "Your father's a coward and a fool, but he ain't wrong about the Carsons. They would have killed him, slow and painful, and probably burned half the town just for the entertainment value. Seemed a shame. So you did it out of the goodness of your heart?" "Didn't say that." He pulled out a tobacco pouch and began rolling a cigarette. "I said I got history with Dutch Carson. He's been moving in on territory that used to be mine. This gives me an excuse to ride into his camp and have a conversation about boundaries." "And I'm what? Insurance. A gift. You're a debt being paid." He lit the cigarette and took a long drag, the tip glowing red in the darkness. "Your father owed the Carsons $500. I'm taking on that debt in exchange for your horse and your company. Once I square things with Dutch, you're free to go wherever you want." Sarah absorbed this. "You're saying you don't intend to keep me as your wife, or whatever my father promised?" "I never agreed to make you my wife. I agreed to take you off his hands. What happens after that is up to you." He studied her through the cigarette smoke. "Though I'll be honest, Miss Bennet. A young woman alone out here don't have a lot of good options. Might be you're better off staying with me for a while, at least till we get to a proper town where you could find work." "Work as what? A saloon girl? A laundress? Those are honest trades. Said by a man who robs trains and banks for a living." Black Jack's teeth flashed white in the firelight, an actual smile. "Fair point. But I'm good at what I do, and I don't pretend otherwise. Can you say the same?" Sarah didn't have an answer for that. She'd spent 19 years being her father's unpaid labor, keeping house and minding the store, learning nothing that would serve her out here in the wider world. She had no skills beyond cooking and sewing, no education beyond basic reading and arithmetic, no prospects beyond a lifetime of drudgery in service to some man or another. "I can learn," she said finally. "Whatever I need to know to survive, I can learn it." "I believe you might at that." Black Jack finished his cigarette and ground it out under his boot heel. "Get some sleep, Miss Bennet. We got another long day ahead tomorrow." He spread out his bedroll on one side of the fire, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah did the same on the other side. She lay down fully clothed, staring up at the vast canopy of stars overhead. The same stars that had watched over redemption were watching here too, indifferent to human suffering and trade. She thought about her father, probably drinking himself into a stupor at the saloon, celebrating his temporary reprieve. She thought about her mother, dead before Sarah had a chance to know her. She thought about the strange, dangerous man sleeping a few feet away who had bought her life with a promise to a gang of outlaws. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was restless and full of dreams she wouldn't remember come morning. They rode for 3 more days, always heading west and south, deeper into the wild country where law was a distant rumor and survival depended on being faster and meaner than the next person. Black Jack proved to be surprisingly good company once Sarah got past her anger and resentment. He knew the land intimately, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about his travels. He'd been all over, California during the gold rush, Colorado when silver was discovered, down into Mexico and back up through the territories. "Why'd you become an outlaw?" Sarah asked on the 3rd day as they rested the horses in the shade of a cottonwood grove. Black Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Didn't set out to be one. Started during the war, Confederate side, though I ain't proud of it now. After we lost, I came home to Texas to find my family's ranch burned, my parents dead, everything gone. Union soldiers claimed they were retaliating for guerrilla actions in the area. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Didn't matter. I was 20 years old with nothing but a horse and a gun and a whole lot of rage. He pulled his hat down lower. Started by robbing Union supply wagons. Told myself it was justice. Then it was banks that had foreclosed on folks who couldn't pay. Then it was trains carrying rich people's money. After a while, I stopped bothering with justifications. I was good at it, and it paid better than honest work. That's the whole truth of it. You ever think about going straight? Starting over somewhere. Every day. He looked at her then, and there was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable that disappeared almost immediately behind his usual guarded demeanor. But wanting something and being able to have it are two different things. I'm wanted in 4 territories, Miss Bennet. My face is on posters from here to Kansas. Even if I wanted to settle down and raise cattle or run a store, there'd always be someone looking to collect that bounty. Only way a man like me gets to retire is in a pine box. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. That's a hard way to live. It's the way I chose. Can't complain about the consequences. He stood and checked his horse's cinch. We're close now. Carson's gang holes up in a canyon about 10 miles south of here. We'll reach it by nightfall. As promised, they arrived at the canyon just as the sun was setting. Sarah could see firelight flickering between the rocks ahead, hear the faint sounds of men's voices and laughter. Her stomach twisted with nervousness. She'd heard stories about the Carson gang. They were brutal even by outlaw standards, known for unnecessary violence and cruelty. Black Jack seemed to sense her fear. Stay close to me and don't show any weakness. These men are like wolves. They can smell fear and they'll use it against you. They rode into the camp openly, making no attempt at stealth. Men looked up from various activities, cleaning guns, drinking, playing cards, their hands moving to their weapons. But when they recognized Black Jack, the tension eased somewhat, replaced by wary curiosity. "Well, well," drawled a voice from near the largest fire. "Black Jack Malone. Been a while." Dutch Carson stood up, revealing himself to be a big man with a full beard going gray and cold blue eyes that assessed Sarah with uncomfortable interest. "I heard you were operating up north these days. What brings you to my territory?" "Business," Black Jack said, dismounting but keeping one hand near his gun. "Got a proposition for you." "That right?" Dutch's eyes slid to Sarah. "And who's the pretty little thing?" "Part of the proposition. Name's Sarah May Bennet. Her father owed you $500. I'm here to settle that debt." Dutch's eyebrows rose. Old man Bennet? Didn't figure him for having anything worth trading. He's got this girl and a Palomino mare. I'm taking both off his hands and clearing his debt in exchange. Black Jack's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Figured you and I could also have a conversation about territory lines while I'm here. Heard you been pushing north into areas we'd agreed were neutral ground." The camp had gone quiet, everyone watching this confrontation. Dutch studied Black Jack for a long moment, then laughed, breaking the tension. "You got balls, Malone. I'll give you that. Coming into my camp to call me out." He gestured to the fire. "Sit. We'll talk. And we'll see about this girl and whether she's worth $500. The negotiation that followed was the longest 2 hours of Sarah's life. She sat silently while the two outlaws talked, arguing over territory and debts and old grievances. Money changed hands at some point, Black Jack apparently paying the bulk of the debt in cash he'd gotten from somewhere. Dutch made several crude suggestions about Sarah's value, testing Black Jack's resolve, but each time Black Jack deflected calmly, making it clear she was under his protection. Finally, as the fire burned low, Dutch nodded. "All right. Debt's paid. Bennett's clear. But Jack, you keep your operations north of the Guadalupe River. Anything south of that is mine. We got an understanding." "We do." "Then we got no quarrel." Dutch stood and offered his hand. Black Jack shook it, and just like that, the deal was done. They left the canyon at first light, both eager to put distance between themselves and the Carson gang. Sarah felt like she could finally breathe again once they were clear of that place. "Thank you," she said as they rode through the morning, "for what you did back there. The way Dutch was looking at me. Don't mention it. Black Jack kept his eyes on the trail ahead. Besides, I meant what I said. You're under my protection now, for whatever that's worth. Why though? You didn't have to include me in this deal. You could have just paid the money and left me with my father. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I know what it's like to be traded away like property, to have no say in your own fate. My parents arranged a marriage for me before they died, to some rancher's daughter I'd never met. Whole thing was about combining land and herds, nothing to do with what either of us wanted. When I came back from the war and found everything gone, there was a part of me that was relieved. At least I was free, even if I was free in a world that had gone to hell. He glanced at her. Figured you deserved the same chance. To be free, even if it's terrifying. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built up starting to crumble. Where are we going now? Town called Silver Creek, about a week's ride west. It's rough but it's growing, lot of mining operations in the area. You could find work there if you wanted. Or... He hesitated. Or you could stay with me for a while longer. I got a cabin in the mountains north of there, place nobody knows about. It ain't much, but it's safe and it's got 4 walls and a roof. You could stay there till you figured out what you wanted to do next. Why would you offer that? Because you were right about what you said that first night. A woman alone out here don't have good options. And because... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Because I wouldn't mind the company. Gets lonely up there. Sarah thought about her father, about redemption, about everything she'd left behind. Then she thought about this strange, dangerous man who'd bought her freedom with a combination of money and reputation, who'd faced down a gang of killers to settle her father's debt, who was offering her sanctuary with no strings attached. All right, she said. I'll come to your cabin. For a little while at least, till I figure things out. Black Jack nodded, and though he didn't smile, something in his posture relaxed. Good. That's... good. They rode on in companionable silence. And for the first time since her father had announced his terrible bargain, Sarah felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The future was uncertain and probably dangerous, but it was hers. That had to count for something. The journey to Silver Creek took longer than expected. They had to detour around a territory where Black Jack said a rival gang operated, then got caught in a flash flood that forced them to hole up in a cave for 2 days while the water receded. During those 2 days, Sarah learned more about the man who'd bought her freedom. He told her about growing up on a ranch, about his mother who'd taught him to read from a battered copy of Shakespeare, about his father who'd been tough but fair. He told her about the war, though those stories were darker, full of things he'd seen and done that still haunted him. He told her about the loneliness of the outlaw life, always moving, never able to trust anyone completely, knowing that any day could be his last. In return, Sarah shared her own stories. About growing up without a mother, about the slow decline of her father into bitterness and debt, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, or a real city with theaters and libraries. About feeling trapped in a life that seemed to stretch ahead of her with no variation, just endless days of the same struggles and disappointments. You'll see the ocean, Black Jack said with surprising certainty. Maybe not tomorrow or next year, but you'll get there. You got that determined look about you, like once you set your mind to something, you don't let go. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. But yeah, I suppose it is. When they finally reached Silver Creek, it was everything Black Jack had promised. Rough and growing, full of miners and merchants and all the people who followed where money flowed. They restocked supplies at a general store where the proprietor greeted Black Jack as Mr. Malone, with no hint of recognition from wanted posters. Apparently here he was just another rough man in a town full of them. From Silver Creek, they headed into the mountains, following trails that got progressively narrower and more difficult. The air grew cooler and thinner, and pine trees replaced the scrubby vegetation of the lower elevations. Sarah had never been this high up before, and despite everything, she found herself enchanted by the beauty of it, the way the light filtered through the trees, the sound of streams tumbling over rocks, the vastness of the sky. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend in the trail, nestled in a small clearing beside a creek. It was small but well-built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Split wood was stacked neatly under an overhang, and there was a small corral for the horses. "Home," Black Jack said simply, dismounting. Over the next few weeks, they fell into an unexpected routine. Black Jack would ride out for a few days at a time, never saying where he was going but always coming back with money or supplies. Sarah kept the cabin, cooked their meals, tended a small garden she'd started, and found herself enjoying the solitude and simplicity of it all. When Black Jack was there, they'd talk in the evenings by the fire, sharing stories and slowly, carefully, building something that felt almost like friendship. One evening, about 2 months after they'd arrived at the cabin, Sarah was washing dishes when Black Jack spoke from his chair by the fire. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said before, about learning whatever you needed to survive." Sarah turned to look at him. "What about it? I could teach you things. How to shoot, how to track, how to live off the land. Skills that would serve you no matter where you end up." He met her eyes. "And if you wanted to learn the other side of things, how to plan a job, how to read people, how to disappear when you need to, I could teach you that too." "You want to make me an outlaw?" "I want to give you options. Knowledge is power, Miss Bennet. The more you know, the more choices you have." Sarah considered this. It was a far cry from the life she'd imagined for herself, but then again, that life had been built on false promises and her father's failures. This was real. This was survival. "All right," she said. "Teach me." And so he did. Over the following months, Sarah learned to shoot with accuracy, to move silently through the forest, to read tracks and weather signs. She learned how to defend herself with both gun and knife, how to pick locks, how to spot a mark and read their tells. Black Jack was a patient teacher, and Sarah proved to be an eager student. But more than that, something deeper was growing between them. It started with lingering glances, touches that lasted a moment longer than necessary, conversations that stretched late into the night. Sarah found herself noticing things about him, the way his rare smiles transformed his face, the gentleness of his hands when he tended to an injured animal, the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the dark hours before dawn. One night, unable to sleep, Sarah found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the mountain chill. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Old habit. Safer to be awake than caught sleeping." He glanced at her. "You should go back to bed." Instead, Sarah moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "Jack, I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Why did you really take me from my father? The real reason, not the story about Dutch Carson and territory lines." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Because when I looked at you standing there in that dusty street, about to be traded away for a horse, I saw myself. Saw what I'd been before the war, before everything went wrong. Young and trapped and desperate for a way out." He turned to face her fully. "And I thought, maybe I can't save myself, but maybe I can save someone else. Maybe that counts for something." "It counts for everything," Sarah whispered. When he kissed her, it was soft and tentative, asking rather than demanding. Sarah kissed him back, all the walls she'd built around her heart finally crumbling completely. When they pulled apart, she stayed close, her forehead resting against his. "I love you," she said, the words simple and true. "I don't know when it happened, but it did." "Sarah." His voice was rough with emotion. "You deserve better than a wanted man living on borrowed time. Maybe. But you're what I want." She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. "You gave me freedom, Jack. The least I can do is choose how to use it. And I choose you, for however long we have." He pulled her close then, holding her like she was something precious he was afraid might break. They stayed that way for a long time, two people who'd been lost finding something like home in each other. The seasons turned. Sarah and Jack became partners in every sense of the word. She rode with him on some of his jobs, proving herself capable and quick-thinking. They robbed from those who could afford the loss and helped those who couldn't, building a strange kind of reputation, outlaws with a code, dangerous but not cruel. They also built a life together in that mountain cabin, full of quiet moments and simple pleasures. Sarah still dreamed of seeing the ocean someday, and Jack promised they'd get there eventually. But for now, they had this: the cabin and the mountains, the freedom of the open range, and each other. Sarah sometimes thought about her father, wondered if he ever regretted his choice. She hoped he did. But mostly she didn't think about him at all. That was a different life, a different girl. She was Sarah Bennett no longer. She was Jack Malone's partner, his equal, his love. She'd been traded for a horse, but she'd found something worth infinitely more. One morning, about a year after that first day in redemption, Sarah woke to find Jack watching her with an expression that was almost peaceful. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking how lucky I am," he said. "That your father was a fool and desperate enough to make that trade." "Best worst thing that ever happened to me," Sarah agreed. "To both of us." He pulled her close. "Come on, we've got a job to plan. Heard about a payroll shipment coming through Silver Creek next week. Should be enough to finally make that trip to California you've been talking about." "The ocean." "The ocean," he confirmed. Sarah grinned and kissed him. The future was still uncertain, still probably dangerous. But it was theirs, built on choices rather than obligation, on love rather than desperation. And that made all the difference. They rose and started their day, two outlaws in love, making their own rules in a world that had tried to break them both. It wasn't the life Sarah had imagined for herself at 19, standing in that dusty Texas street. It was better.